Have you ever walked away from a conversation, not angry, not even sad, just strangely hollow? You spoke your truth, you were clear, or at least you thought so, but somewhere along the way your words got twisted, your intent was questioned, and your calm quietly slipped away. Not because you were wrong, but because someone turned the moment into a battlefield, and without even realizing it, you stepped into the arena, defending, explaining, reacting, only to leave feeling exposed. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, not every battle announces itself with noise. Some come disguised, as questions, as civility, as the appearance of honest dialogue. But beneath that surface lies something else, control. Because most arguments aren't about truth. They're about pulling you off balance, about getting you to hand over the one thing that makes you powerful, your composure. So, what do you do when someone speaks not to understand, but to trap you? What do you do when every answer feels like a step deeper into someone else's game? That's what we're going to explore. Not to teach you how to argue better, but how to see the trap before it closes. And to walk right past it, untouched. Because sometimes, the highest form of strength is not needing to respond at all. 1. The trap hidden behind the smile. Have you ever entered a conversation thinking it would be light, just an exchange of ideas, only to feel something shift, almost imperceptibly? The words were polite, the tone was civil, but somewhere between the question and your reply, you could sense it. This wasn't a dialogue anymore. It was a trap dressed in manners. The Stoics warned us, life doesn't always shout when it strikes. Sometimes it leans in close, lowers its voice, and smiles as it sharpens the knife. Epictetus put it plainly, if someone does wrong, the harm is theirs, unless you choose to pick it up. And that's exactly what happens in these subtle battles of speech. Someone asks a question that seems innocent on the surface, but buried inside it is a quiet accusation, a twist of logic, a false premise that puts you on trial for something you never said, never meant, never believed. And if you respond without seeing the trap, you're no longer speaking your truth. You're defending a version of it they've already rewritten. There's a pattern to how it unfolds. It starts with what sounds like curiosity. So would you say your message mostly appeals to men? But then comes the turn. Don't you think that's divisive? Or worse, isn't that harmful to women? Notice the tactic. The question isn't truly seeking your view. It's leading you into a moral corner. It frames your neutrality as guilt, your silence as violence, your opinion as threat. It's not a conversation. It's a setup. And once you're on the defensive, everything changes. You stop sharing and start justifying. You try to clarify, explain, soften your tone. And in doing so, you've already given them the one thing they were after, not the truth, but your balance. I remember a moment like this from my own life. Years ago, during a quiet dinner, someone leaned across the table and asked, "Why do you always have to speak like you're right?" I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't even made a claim. But I realized instantly, this wasn't about the words I said. It was about how they felt, hearing them. And they didn't want clarity. They wanted control. So I smiled and said nothing. Because the moment I tried to defend my tone, my posture, my intent, I'd be playing a game I never agreed to play. This is where Stoicism offers more than just insight. It offers armor. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, if you are disturbed, it is not by the thing itself, but by your judgment of it. In these conversations, the judgment comes fast. You feel the sting of implication, the tightening of the trap, and your instinct is to respond, to fight your way out with logic. But logic isn't the weapon here. Theirs is tone, suggestion, framing. If you meet it with logic, you've already lost ground. So what do? You don't explain, you don't defend, you don't panic, you pause. That pause is where you reclaim your power. That breath is your shield. Because in the silence you can see clearly, they never asked to understand you, they asked to unseat you. And if you keep your footing, they fail. Seneca wrote, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." But that remedy applies to every emotional ambush, not just anger. The delay allows you to observe, to unhook yourself from their bait, to see the strategy in play. Because here's the truth, when someone asks, "Don't you think that's a bit problematic?" or "Doesn't that make you feel ashamed?" they're not interested in your answer. They're asking you to confess to a belief they already decided is wrong. Don't fall into that. Don't give weight to questions that disguise accusations. Instead, train your perception. The Stoics taught that wisdom begins with seeing things as they are, not as others want you to see them. In speech, that means learning to read intention, not just language, to detect when someone is using curiosity as a cloak for control. You can often hear it in how they begin their question, the hesitance, the edge, the quick shift from inquiry to implication. The attempt to make you speak from a place of guilt, not clarity. And you'll feel it too in your chest, in your breath. That subtle constriction, the urge to clear the air. But ask yourself, am I being asked to share or being pushed to defend something I never said? Because once you answer a loaded question, you're trapped in a debate you never agreed to. So what do you do when it happens? You step back, not physically but mentally. You assess the question's structure. You ask yourself, what is this person really trying to get me to say? And if the question is dishonest, you don't dignify it with a direct reply. You stay calm. You clarify, not for them, but for yourself and for anyone listening. You might say, "That's not what I said," or simply, "That's not a fair framing," or even better, "Let me clarify what I actually mean." And then you speak your truth again, not from defense, but from stillness. Because once you know how to spot the trap, you don't need to fight your way out of it. You just don't step in. This is the first rule of Stoic speech. Clarity before reaction, stillness before response, perception before persuasion. You don't argue every time someone demands it. You don't explain every time someone twists your words. You hold your ground, not out of pride, but out of principle. Because when someone questions your light with shadowed words, you don't chase them into the dark. You stand where you are. And in the next part, we'll explore another tactic, just as subtle, but even more manipulative, the "so what you're really saying is move." Let's break it down and learn how to dismantle it with grace and power. 2. Twisted words, stolen meaning. Have you ever tried to explain yourself carefully, sincerely, only to feel the very meaning of your words slip through someone else's fingers? You spoke with thought. You chose your language with care. And yet they leaned in, tilted their heads slightly, and said, "So what you're really saying is," and suddenly you're no longer defending your idea. You're defending a distortion of it, a version that was never yours to begin with. It's a strange kind of theft. Not of objects, but of intention. The Stoics understood that one of the greatest battles is not fought in grand arenas, but in the silent arena of meaning. What is not yours to carry, Epictetus said, lay down. And yet, in these moments, we often pick up burdens that were never ours, false accusations, misreadings, assumptions dressed as summaries. When someone says, "so you're saying," and proceeds to twist your meaning into something grotesque or absurd, they're not seeking understanding. They are building a puppet just to strike it down, and if you react, if you step into their construction, you begin to fight battles that don't belong to you. This is known, in modern terms, as the straw man, but in Stoic terms, it is a collapse of dialogue, a retreat from logos, reasoned discourse, into illusion and performance. It happens subtly. A person takes your words, adds an edge, sharpens the corners, and hands them back to you like an accusation. So you think this entire group is to blame? So you're suggesting we return to primitive times? So you're saying suffering is good? They don't say these things to seek clarity. They say them to trap. And here's the tragedy. Once you begin explaining what you didn't say, you abandon what you truly meant. You let someone else write the rules of the conversation, and then you wonder why you feel unheard, even after speaking so much. I remember watching a speaker who had spent years studying responsibility and discipline. He spoke of how modern society struggles with purpose, how many young people, men and women alike, feel untethered. But before he could finish, someone interjected, "So what you're saying is, women are the reason men are lost." He paused, not in confusion, but in disappointment. Because the moment had shifted, not toward inquiry, but toward accusation. That's the power of the twist. It kills conversation before it truly begins. So how does the Stoic respond? Not with anger, not with more explanation, but with precision. You don't correct their version of your argument. You return to your own. No, that's not what I said. What I meant was, and you say it again, not defensively, not louder, but clearer. There is strength in that return. There is dignity in staying anchored to your truth. Because here's the truth most forget. You are not responsible for the stories others build from your silence. You are only responsible for speaking with integrity. If they twist it, let it unravel. If they mock it, let it echo. You stay with what you know. Seneca wrote, "The wise man is indifferent to praise and blame alike. He lives in accordance with nature, not with the applause of the crowd." That means when someone misrepresents you, you don't rush to perform your innocence. You don't barter your peace for approval. You simply stand where you were always standing and speak again. Now, there is another reason this tactic hurts so deeply. It's not just the misunderstanding, it's the erosion of trust. When someone twists your meaning, it's not your logic they're questioning, it's your character. And the natural instinct is to defend that, to try to prove, "I'm not who you say I am." But the Stoics would say, that's not your task. You are who you are, regardless of whether they see it clearly. And the moment you try to force that recognition, you give away your center. You hand over your stillness. There's an ancient story told of a teacher who, while speaking in the public square, was interrupted by a heckler who shouted, "So you're saying the gods are useless?" The teacher smiled gently and replied, "I said we must govern ourselves. What you heard is your own war." And then he continued teaching, unmoved. That is the response of someone who sees the twist for what it is, a projection, not a question. So the next time someone says, "So you're saying," and their tone carries accusation instead of curiosity, do not follow them into the weeds. Don't defend the misquote. Don't react to the shadow. Just return, recenter, restate. And if they twist it again, leave it. Because your truth, well spoken, does not need repetition to remain true. In the end, those who genuinely want to understand you will ask. They will clarify. They will say, "Did you mean," instead of, "So you're saying." That is the difference between dialogue and domination. And that is the difference between peace and performance. So the next time your meaning is stolen mid-sentence, do not chase it. Stand where you are. Speak again. Speak simply, and let the rest fall away. Because when you anchor yourself in what you truly mean, no trap can hold you. Now, let's move into something even more subtle. What happens when someone doesn't twist your words, but acts as if you've already agreed with something you never said? It's not an accusation this time, it's an assumption. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself defending beliefs you never held. Let's talk about how to dismantle those, quietly but powerfully. 3. Assumptions you never chose. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you were made to answer for something you never said? Not because you were unclear, not because your values shifted, but because someone, somewhere in that moment, quietly placed a belief on your shoulders, and you carried it without even realizing. It doesn't begin with accusation, but assumption. And by the time you notice, you're already explaining something you never chose. The Stoics warned us of this, how easy it is to lose your clarity not through confrontation, but through carelessness. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish." Why? Because if you chase every assumption others make about you, you'll lose the thread of your own character. Better to stand quietly in truth than to run endlessly toward misunderstood approval. In today's world, these assumptions come wrapped in polite questions, seemingly neutral, deceptively simple. Questions like, "Why should people tolerate that?" may sound fair, but they often rest on hidden assumptions, and if you rush to answer, you're already standing on a foundation that isn't yours. Let me give you an example from a moment I'll never forget. Years ago, during a group meeting, someone turned to me and asked, "So, you're okay with ignoring the emotional needs of the team?" I froze, not because I was guilty, but because I saw what had happened. Somewhere along the discussion, someone had quietly written a script about me, and I was now expected to perform it. But I didn't. I took a breath. I let the silence settle. Then I said, "Let's step back. I never said I was okay with that. Let's begin with what I actually believe." And just like that, the current shifted. Because when someone smuggles an assumption into a conversation, they're counting on your discomfort to make you play along. But when you pause, when you strip their words back to their roots, you expose the foundation for what it really is: sand. That is the Stoic way. We do not rush to answer questions that were never ours to begin with. We return to stillness. And from that stillness, we speak only what is real. There's a term for this tactic in rhetoric: assuming the sale. It's when someone speaks to you as if you've already agreed, so you feel compelled to justify rather than clarify. But the Stoic response is simple. Clarify first, respond second. Never let urgency outrun understanding. Another way this shows up is when someone uses emotionally charged comparisons to corner you. Let's say someone asks, "Why shouldn't people have the right to decide their future?" Embedded in that is the implication that you don't think they should. If you reply, "Well, because," without first challenging the premise, you've already lost, not the debate, but your footing. The right response? They already do. Direct. Calm, complete, no chase, no scramble, just truth, simply spoken. Here's another version. "So now you want to tell people to stop being angry and abusive, as if those are the same." Look at that closely. Anger and abuse, two entirely different realities, shoved together like they belong in the same moral box. If you answer that question without separating them, you're accepting a lie before you even open your mouth. In that moment, the Stoic doesn't rush to defend. He says, "Let's deal with one thing at a time, because a divided question deserves a divided answer." And that's the deeper point here. Assumptions rush you. They pressure you to prove yourself, to react quickly, to clear your name. But when you slow the conversation down, when you move it out of the fog and into the light, the spell breaks. The person who assumes your values will have to look again, because your silence doesn't mean consent. Your pause doesn't mean guilt. And your refusal to chase a misinterpretation is not cowardice, it's wisdom. Marcus Aurelius reminds us constantly, you are disturbed not by events, but by your perception of them. In moments like these, the event is not just the question, it's the story someone is trying to pull you into. Your task is not to fix that story. Your task is to remain loyal to your own. So the next time someone asks, "Why do you believe?" take a breath. Ask yourself, what unspoken agreement are they assuming I've made? And if you didn't make it, say so. Simply, clearly. No, that's not my position. That one sentence can be a wall between your peace and their pressure. If this idea resonates with you, just comment the word clarity below. One word, but it carries everything this moment stands for. And if you want to keep learning how to hold your ground in a noisy world, subscribe now. The next lesson might be the one that changes how you carry yourself forever. Because here's the quiet truth. Not every conversation deserves your energy. Not every assumption deserves your breath. You were not made to defend shadows. You were made to live in light. Stay centered. And now, let's move forward. Because there's one more tactic people use when they want to overwhelm. Not with assumption, not with distortion, but with sheer volume. When they try to bury you in noise, in guilt, in 5 arguments at once, it's a different game. But there's still a Stoic answer. Let's uncover it together. 4. Drown them with stillness. Have you ever stood in a room where someone kept raising the volume, not of their voice, but of their words? One question turns into 5. One claim becomes a flurry of accusations. Before you can even respond to the first, they're already 3 steps ahead, twisting the ground beneath you, and you're not debating anymore. You're drowning. This isn't passion, it's strategy. One that's been used for centuries, not to discover truth, but to disrupt it. A technique not of argument, but of overwhelm. The Stoics, though they lived in a slower world, warned us of this storm long before it became common. Seneca said, "If you would judge, first become still." Because when the noise comes, your power lies not in matching its speed, but in refusing to chase it. It's called the smash tactic, a rush of loaded points meant to make your mind stumble before it can respond. But why does it work so often? Because we are trained to answer, to be quick, to prove we're not avoiding the question. So we react, we defend, we scramble to separate the pieces, but by then the pace has swallowed us whole. I remember being in a professional meeting where I disagreed with a project timeline. Instead of discussing the logistics, the project lead looked at me and said, "So you're saying the team's not competent and you don't care if we fail the client?" My throat went dry, not because I agreed, but because I knew what had just happened. 2 entirely different accusations had been crammed into one sentence. One about the team's skill, another about my loyalty. And if I replied without pulling them apart, I'd be defending something I never said. So I didn't. I waited, looked around the room, and then I said slowly, "Let's begin with the first thing you said." That pause, those 8 words, changed everything. The flood slowed, the tone shifted, and for the first time in that conversation, I was standing on ground I could actually trust. This is the art of what the Stoics would call tempo sovereignty, the ability to control your rhythm when the world demands you rush. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." That's not metaphor. That's instruction. When others throw 5 things at once, you are not required to catch them. Let them fall. Let the noise pile up. And when the dust settles, pick one piece, the one that matters, the one that's real. There is a kind of courage that doesn't raise its voice, it lowers its heartbeat. The Stoics understood this. To be unmoved is not to be passive. It is to choose your ground before the battle begins. And in conversation, your ground is your pace. This tactic, the flood, the smash, the speed, is often used by people who fear silence. They fear what might be revealed if the room slows down. So they talk faster, louder, longer. But as Seneca reminds us, time discovers truth. And the one who can create space is the one who gives time a chance to speak. If you've ever been accused of avoiding the issue because you won't respond instantly, remember this: stillness is not avoidance, it's examination. And your first responsibility in a storm is not to answer, it's to see. So, what does that look like practically? It looks like this. When someone bombards you with 3, 4, or 5 layered criticisms, you say, let's pause. I want to respond clearly. And to do that, we need to take these one at a time. That sentence does 2 things at once. It signals respect for the other person's concerns, and it reclaims control of the dialogue. And when the person insists, tries to rush you, or demands a blanket apology, you can respond with calm repetition, one at a time. Otherwise, we'll just talk over each other. Stillness doesn't mean silence. It means authority over reaction. It means slowing the tempo until reason can breathe again. You'll notice something powerful here. When you stop chasing their momentum, they often don't know where to go next, because their power came from pace, not truth. And once that pace breaks, so does their strategy. You don't need to defeat them. You only need to outweight the chaos. In one interview I watched, a guest was asked whether he endorsed both the anger and the abusive actions of some people who claimed to follow him. 2 different things, emotion and harm, smashed together in one sentence, one accusation. He didn't flinch. He said, "Before I answer, I'd like to see clear examples of the behavior you're referring to. No panic, no overcompensation, just clarity demanded before participation." And because of that, the tactic failed. The room had to slow down, the air cleared, and truth had a chance to walk in. That's the Stoic way. Not louder, not faster, just clearer, just still. Because when your stillness becomes a pattern, people adjust to your pace. And even if they don't like it, they start to respect it. That's the power of someone who cannot be rushed. When overwhelmed, stop, let them speak, then wait. Let truth surface before you respond. And speak with the calm of someone who doesn't need to prove anything, only to clarify what is. In the end, your composure is your compass. And no matter how fast the tide comes in, it cannot carry off a soul that's anchored. Stillness is not retreat. It's resistance in its most dignified form. Now, as we move forward, there's one final game of words we need to face. One that seems harmless, even flattering. But it's often the most manipulative of all, when someone pretends to agree with you, just to pull you closer, only to twist the blade once you've let your guard down. Let's talk about the false agreement and how the Stoic mind stays free. 5. Don't chase strawmen. There's a unique kind of frustration that comes not when people disagree with you, but when they distort you. You offer your thoughts with care. You speak plainly, honestly, without games. But then something subtle happens. Your words are reshaped, stretched at the edges, twisted at the core, until what remains no longer resembles your original intent. And now, instead of continuing the conversation, you find yourself defending a version of your belief you never claimed. This is not misunderstanding, it is misrepresentation. And it is one of the most corrosive forces in communication. The Stoics warned against this, not just when others do it, but when we're tempted to do it ourselves. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Let no one have the power to lead you into self-deception, nor into twisting the words of others just to win. Because the moment you abandon clarity for victory, you've already lost something greater." In modern terms, this tactic is often called the straw man. It's when someone builds a flimsy version of your belief, one that's easier to tear down than the real thing. But in Stoic terms, it's not just lazy, it's dishonorable. It signals a mind more focused on dominance than understanding. And here's the trap. Once someone creates that false version of you, it's easy to fall into the defense, to chase after every twist, to clarify every detail, to fight for every inch of meaning they've stolen. But that fight is endless, because straw can't be rebuilt. It burns too quickly, and every time you try to rescue your words from their distortion, you end up fighting inside their frame, not yours. The Stoic approach is different. When someone twists your meaning, you don't argue within the fiction. You return to your foundation. You pause, not to retreat, but to reclaim your footing. You say, "That's not what I said. Let me say it again, clearly." And you don't say it louder. You say it better. In moments like this, clarity becomes your resistance, and calm becomes your defiance. I remember watching a conversation where someone was hit with a rapid-fire statistic, something about how few women held top positions in a specific industry. It was designed to sound like a slam-dunk argument, loaded with moral judgment. But instead of taking the bait, the speaker slowed everything down. He repeated the number back, calmly, precisely, and asked for clarification. That simple move did something powerful. It re-centered the conversation around truth, not emotion. It reminded the room that facts without context are not arguments, they're weapons. This is what Stoic communication looks like. Not fast, not flashy, but deliberate. Because when you speak with clarity, you force others to engage with what's real, not what's easy to attack. Seneca once said, "It is the power of a great mind to suffer fools with grace." That doesn't mean letting others misrepresent you without reply. It means replying without venom. It means answering distortion, not with rage, but with reason. There's also something else the Stoic understands. Persuasion is not just about being right. It's about being heard. And being heard requires more than just facts. It requires form. If you say something profound, but speak in a way no one can visualize, it will vanish like smoke. But if you take the same idea and give it shape, through metaphor, through story, through imagery, it lands, it stays. Imagine saying, "Human systems have developed over hundreds of millions of years." That's true. But it feels distant, abstract. Now imagine adding, "That's so long ago, there weren't even trees yet." Suddenly, the mind locks onto it. The listener feels the weight of time. This is the power of image, not to embellish, but to anchor. When you speak, don't just deliver ideas, deliver experiences, because arguments fade. But imagery lingers. So what should you do when your words are twisted? Don't chase the straw man. Don't follow the fiction. Return, restate, and rebuild with more clarity than before. Let them burn the version they invented. You don't have to put out that fire. It's not your house. Your task is to speak from what is solid, to rise above the fog and show others, not through correction, but through presence, that your position was never weak. It was just misheard. And now you speak again. not to convince, but to clarify. Because in a world full of distortion, the clearest voice will always carry furthest. And in the next part, we'll look at the rarest form of persuasion, the one that doesn't feel like persuasion at all. The kind that quietly guides someone toward a truth they already feel but haven't yet named. Let's explore that quiet power next. 6. Let them find their truth. Have you ever argued with someone who pushed back at everything you said, only to realize later they weren't really disagreeing, they were just resisting? Not your logic, not your words, but the feeling of being wrong, the fear of losing ground. It's a strange thing how two people can say nearly the same truth, yet stand on opposite sides of a conversation, not because of content, but because of pride. And in that pride, even shared values become battlegrounds. Epictetus understood this deeply, that changing a mind isn't about volume or logic alone, but about reaching something quieter beneath the surface. And Marcus Aurelius echoed this when he wrote, "Convince them if you can, but if not, accept it." Sometimes the best way to bring someone closer to your truth is to help them realize they're already standing there, not by saying you're wrong, but by gently showing them you're not as far from this as you think. This kind of persuasion doesn't seek to overpower, it seeks to reveal. It doesn't aim for submission, but for recognition. There was once a discussion where a speaker was accused of violating someone else's sense of dignity, of choosing speech over sensitivity. Rather than push back or deny the premise, he simply turned the question around. "You're doing it too," he said. "Right now, you're risking offending me in the pursuit of truth." And that's what makes this conversation real. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a trap. It was a mirror. And that mirror made the air still. Because in that moment, the questioner wasn't the enemy. She was a reflection, another mind seeking clarity in a confusing world. Her stance didn't collapse, but it softened. And that's all that was needed. This is what the Stoics would call alignment without force. A movement not of argument, but of resonance. Instead of forcing someone to cross over to your side, you hold still and let them notice they were already there. But there's one danger. Just when the alignment begins to appear, when the other starts to nod internally, it's tempting to seize the moment. To say, "See, I told you." To declare victory. But the Stoic doesn't gloat, because victory isn't the goal. Seneca wrote, "It is the mark of a great soul to win without humiliating, to persuade without wounding." When someone begins to shift, let them. Let the realization be theirs. Let it bloom privately, quietly, without pressure. Because the greatest truths are rarely shouted, they are remembered. And when you help someone recall what they already know, what you earn isn't agreement, it's respect. So if you want to lead someone into clarity, don't argue, don't corner, reflect. Because the most powerful truth is the one they discover for themselves. If something in this video stirred a thought or a question, share it below with just a few words. I'll be in the comments during the first hour after launch, so it's a perfect time if you want to connect. Subscribe if this message resonated and you want more tools for staying grounded in tough conversations. And if you're ready to go deeper, the next video will help you master presence without ever raising your voice. Keep your clarity, keep your calm. You've already come this far.